Hello, everyone. Welcome to another weekly episode of Shadow Space. I am your host, Laura Brown, and I just want to start out by wishing you all a happy Good Friday and a happy early Easter. If you guys observe and celebrate, I don't personally celebrate or observe, but I hope you guys have some amazing weekend plans lined up this weekend. Hopefully with friends and family, and I hope wherever you are in the world that the weather is nice and it holds up beautifully for you guys, because our weather here has been bipolar lately, especially today. We have lots of winds, so I apologize in advance if you guys hear winds throughout this show and episode today, because I promise it's not me blowing on the mic. I know how annoying that can be. So anyway, as usual, I always like to start out by thanking you guys, all of my listeners, whether you're new or returning to my podcast. I really appreciate all of your continued support, and I thank you so much for showing me love, and I want to give that love right back to you guys. So thank you for tuning in and hopefully sharing my content with those who need it and anybody that you think would benefit from the topics that we cover here on this podcast. And if you are new to my podcast, I am your host, Laura Brown. I am a certified trauma-informed meditation as well as a breathing coach. I publish weekly episodes related to self-discovery, self-development, introspection, working with the shadow, which is most often just the hidden parts that we have about ourselves, the hidden unconscious patterns, the ideas that we hold about ourselves, and so much more. And I really just created the podcast to guide those who may seek that deeper understanding of themselves, or wanting to find ways to work through certain areas of their life where they may feel stuck. However, I do sometimes cover certain topics that I deem can be sensitive. So I like to share a full disclaimer that I am not a licensed therapist. And by all means, the topics that I cover here on my podcast are not meant to diagnose or treat anyone. All the topics that I cover on my podcast are based on my personal life, all of my personal experiences, and my personal journey. And I really just advise anybody I speak to, whether in person or on this show, to really be very discerning and use your best judgment when it comes to your health and well-being, because that is so important, especially if you find that you are suffering in a certain aspect of your life. And I also want to encourage you to reach out and seek the support that you may need. I as well am happy to be a resource to you and a guide for you as well. So feel free to reach out to me. My website is shadowspacehealing.com, or you can connect with me on my socials on Instagram at shadowspacehealing, as well as TikTok at shadowspacehealing. I am currently in the process of setting up my YouTube channel, so I will let you guys know when that is complete, and you can feel free to reach out to me there as well, or leave me a message here. And I also did make sure that all of my socials are linked to my profile here on my page, so feel free to connect with me there if it's easier for you guys to find me that way. Okay? All right, so with all that being said, let's dive into today's topic. It's actually something that happened to me last night, so it's rather raw for me, but I just thought it would be important for me to bring it onto my podcast and really talk about, my perspective on this, as well as, discuss and share my story with you guys, as I always like to do. So today's topic is self-forgiveness. And I know self-forgiveness can be very sensitive. It's a very sensitive topic, but as well, it's one that I feel that many of us, if you were raised in a traditional environment or just old school ways, right? Certainly you probably have never been encouraged to forgive yourself, or maybe even encouraged to explore this topic and what it might mean for you. So for me, in my upbringing and just my traditional family style, this was not a concept that was discussed at all. I had to learn this on my own through my experiences, through my journey, as most of my experiences have led me on that path to really learn on my own. So yesterday I had sort of an experience that was, I would consider, a breakthrough, but it was just really something completely different that I've never experienced before. And so I'll share that story with you guys. So I sometimes experience challenges with sleep. I don't want to label it insomnia per se. I try to tend to stay away from labeling things because I don't want those things to become that thing. This is why I choose personally not to label many things in my life. But it is borderline insomnia, if I can be honest. And so sometimes the struggles with sleep can be very intense for me. And what I've found to be extremely helpful for myself is to find grounding. And through that process, I like to use meditation as my self-help tool, right? And so I always lean on meditation. So at night, if I'm struggling to find sleep, I will at some point roll out my mat and just sit on my mat and just start to meditate in the middle of the night. And sometimes that means meditation happens at 2 a.m., other times 3, other times 4, depending on how late I'm up. I try to find a way to ground myself and just calm my mind, because a lot of it for me has to do with anxiety as well, and so I know a lot of people struggle with that. I have struggled with anxiety for a very long time privately, and I will share my experience with that on another episode for you guys, because I've had my own personal discoveries with anxiety and my own experiences with it that I really want to share with you guys and share my perspective on it. But anyway, going back to my story last night. So I was trying to find a way to ground myself and really just get myself to a calm state so I can get back to sleep. And I had this experience where I was brought to face certain parts of myself that I would say I probably had, I won't say disowned, but certain parts of myself that I didn't fully integrate. And so the experience I had with self-forgiveness was that I was brought to look at these parts of myself in my past as exactly as they were. And I was brought to look at them from a compassionate state and to forgive them. And also to understand that they had to play out in the way that they did, and that I had to live out that version of myself exactly like I did. And that was all I was required to do and nothing more. And so for me, that was so powerful because it actually led me to a breakthrough, to see myself as a whole person and to integrate those parts of myself. And I also want to add, as I meditate, I do sometimes use sound bath music. And I found this lady on YouTube, and I can't remember her name. I will try to find her name and share it with you guys, I promise, because she is just incredible. Her music is just so powerful. It vibrates through your whole being. At least for me, it did. And so I was listening to her music, and when I first started tuning into her music, I started to feel a huge sense of grief come over me. And once that happened, I allowed myself to sit through that the uncomfortability of those emotions. And I found myself in a place where I was crying, and I allowed that to happen as well. And that's important for me to share, because I think sometimes when we are confronted with heavy, intense emotions, that come to the surface like they did for me unexpectedly, sometimes we want to disconnect from those emotions and not feel them. But here's the deal. Like the saying goes, we can't heal what we don't feel. So we have to be willing to feel it in order to heal it. Now, for me, my experience with self-forgiveness goes far back, years and years ago, when I initially found the man that I like to call my mentor, who is Dr. Michael B. Beckwith. So for those of you who are interested in looking him up or trying to find his work, you can look him up. He's on all socials, and he is just an amazing guy who has contributed so much to my transformation. Because years ago, when I started on my spiritual journey, I felt really frustrated, and I knew I wanted to change something, but I just didn't know where to start. And then I came across his work, and I signed on to one of his courses called the Life Visioning Mastery. And in one of his courses, some of the homework that you're given is not even called homework, it's called growth work. And so I started to do my growth work and really just explore the foundations of myself and the foundations of the self. And he explains it so beautifully. And so there's a part in that course where he talks about forgiveness, and that self-forgiveness is all forgiveness. So I explored self-forgiveness on a spiritual context when I did that course, when I took that course. But I also explored self-forgiveness in a practical sense when I started to be more intentional about my forgiveness, which is kind of the practical side, is to really intend that you are going to forgive, and really work actively like you would any other self-development area of your life, but really intend and sometimes incorporate visualization, meditation, affirmative prayer, or whatever, self-help tool helps you. And so I explored that, the practical side of self-forgiveness as well, but I never had an experience quite like I did last night with it, because for me, last night was more an integration. It was more so looking at every version of myself as it was, but accepting it as it was, loving it as it was, and welcoming it as it was today, and incorporating that into myself and integrating that into myself. And quite honestly, through my meditation, I found myself hugging myself, crying, and also welcoming all these parts of myself within myself and saying, you know what, it's okay. A lot of the things that have happened were not your fault. They had to happen that way. And there's nothing you can do to fix them. You have to love them, embrace them, and welcome them in. They were all important, integral parts of you that needed to happen in order for you to become the person that you are today. And that was the breakthrough for me. That was what the highlight was of that entire experience. It was the acceptance, finally, that all of the things that I have endured, right, in the past, that I was still holding on to in certain aspects of myself, clearly, otherwise it wouldn't come up. They were meant to happen that way. They had to happen that way. And that there was nothing else I could have done differently. And everything that I've done through all those versions of myself were perfect. They were meant to happen that way. So everything was good. And there's nothing I need to do. And I think I said it earlier in the show, if you have a fixer type personality, you want to visit these areas, right? And you want to fix certain things. You always want to, I could have and I should have and all of these things. And that takes a lot of mental energy, and it takes a lot of energy within ourselves to hang on to that, wanting to fix what is gone. But let me tell you, when you come to this self-acceptance and just the integration that I experienced yesterday, that's a major breakthrough. And I wanted to share that on my podcast this week as our topic, because I talked to a lot of people who also have similar experiences or struggle with self-forgiveness. And I know I haven't fully shared my story here on my podcast. I've shared bits and pieces of my story, but I've had a pretty turbulent childhood, and certain parts of my childhood were very, very painful. Some were very traumatic, and I haven't fully shared those parts of myself here on my podcast, but I promise I will, because I think I see the power now in being vulnerable, which is also something that I was never taught. I was also raised to be strong. I was raised to be the person that holds it all together, and I was that rock for my family. I was for a while. I was the glue. I was the rock. I was the person that had to keep it together so things didn't fall apart. And so I was raised to take care of everyone, and I didn't understand the concept of taking care of myself till much later again in my life. But I will share some of those details so you guys can kind of see where I go with, these topics and where my perspectives come from sometimes. And so back to self-forgiveness, and what I was saying earlier, as I talk to a lot of people, who struggle with self-forgiveness as well, it's really important to understand that self-forgiveness is essential in order for us to set ourselves free. But it's not an easy process either, because for the reasons that I shared earlier, if you were raised in a traditional or old school way, this is not a concept that was discussed. I'm pretty sure this is not something where you were sitting at a dinner table or breakfast table with your family and the topic of the day was, okay, let's look at self-forgiveness and see where you can forgive yourself today for all the hurt and stuff that has happened this week. I'm sure it was not like that. For me, it was never like that. I didn't understand the idea and the concept behind this till much later in my adult life. And so if you struggle with this, I just want to say that it's normal, but at the same time, it is so essential for your well-being to work through self-forgiveness. And this is why I created my podcast, because I want to be here to share my experiences with you guys, because I know when we are in these spaces, we feel like we're alone. We tend to suffer in silence. We tend to suffer alone. We tend to suffer in our shadows or in our perceived darkness, where we feel misunderstood, where we feel alone, where we feel like nobody can understand us. So therefore, we don't open up. We don't share our experiences, and we don't share not because we don't want to. We don't share because maybe there's the fear of rejection, or fear of judgment, or fear of misjudgment, or fear of misunderstanding. And this is what holds us back and keeps us in our shadows. And this is why I say the shadow work is so powerful. And this is what I was reminded of with my experience yesterday through my meditation of forgiving myself and integrating these parts of myself, because clearly I've worked through self-forgiveness for a while and I understand the concept. But I think understanding the concept, which is sometimes also I find to be a hindrance for some of us, because we can intellectualize the process all we want by reading books, by attending seminars, by, just learning as much as we can about the topic and ways we can overcome it. We can intellectualize and cognize that process all we want. But what really changes it is by us allowing ourselves to feel and to sit through these uncomfortable emotions that may come up. Like for me, I felt caught off guard because I wasn't expecting it. For crying out loud, I was just trying to go back to sleep. I didn't think I would have a deep breakthrough in the middle of the night, but I guess in hindsight, I feel like I was guided to experience that last night through my sleepless night, to have that experience, you know? And so the self-forgiveness and where you start, I don't think also is always clear, right? Especially if you have never been open to the idea and the concept of it. But I think that we all have our unique ways to get there. And once we get there, we have to allow ourselves the opportunity to sit with the uncomfortable emotions that come up. Because yes, guess what? It can be overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me. You know, I think I've found myself using my breath throughout the whole process to just sit, to be able to sit through those uncomfortable emotions, because emotions are energy, right? And sometimes they come so much and they're so intense that if we don't learn to sit through them, we can just find ourselves wanting to escape the entire experience, which defeats the purpose of what we are led to do in the first place, which is to address the core issue and to really look through the shadow and do the shadow work and to work through the things that are holding us back. You know, because for me, I feel completely different today. You know, I don't think anyone can see it, but I feel it, right? I feel more whole. I feel like I'm freer. I feel like I understand myself to another level that is just so special for me. But I had to allow myself to sit through those uncomfortable feelings, right? And to experience that whole experience that happened. And so, again, going back to the topic at hand, I know I've shared most of my story and I'm looking at the clock here because I don't have a lot of time with these episodes, unfortunately. But to forgive yourself is so crucial to setting yourself free, and to also giving yourself the opportunity to have a different experience in this lifetime. Because guess what? You're not here to only experience the suffering. The suffering happens, yes, but you are worthy of so much more. You have the ability to experience something different for yourself, but it takes the work to be able to get through these barriers and to transcend that and to break through, like I had in my experience last night, you know? And so some of the ways I find that are helpful with, you know, beginning the process of self-forgiveness is to really remember that some of the mistakes that have happened are all part of our learning experiences. They become lessons, right? They are lessons that were meant to happen. Like I was reminded in all my versions that I lived out, these were all lessons I was learning, and they were important to becoming who I am today. So I think the path to self-forgiveness is to really look at how you can reframe some of those past experiences that you've had into, you know, like I said, into maybe looking at the mistakes like lessons, and they were part of the learning experience that you needed, you know. And then also perhaps giving yourself permission to process those emotions. Like I had to give myself permission yesterday, right? And to really own part of the mistake, right? And see what you can do about it. Sometimes there's things, other times there isn't. And so this is where self-acceptance comes in. This is where self-compassion comes in. And if you guys are interested in learning more about self-compassion, I covered that in some of my previous episodes. So feel free to go back and listen to those. And then grieving, right? The consequences of our actions or other people's actions. Like for me, I was so surprised that I was overcome with grief in my experience yesterday, but that was important for me to cry and grieve and let go and release so that I can welcome with ease and allow myself to accept myself and accept those parts of myself. And that was beautiful. It's such a beautiful experience, right? And so forgiving yourself is just being willing to move forward in your life. You know, being willing to let go of the feelings and emotions that are associated with what might have gone wrong for you in your life, whatever your story might be around that. And so it's really a sense of freedom. It's just a new level of freedom that just grants you more space and more openness in your life to welcome the things that are actually aligned with you, that you are worthy of. It's creating that sense of space and peace within yourself. But it's also letting go of all the toxins and chemicals that we sometimes create as a result of holding on to unforgiveness. So that's also very important to say, because if we don't forgive ourselves, we recreate these scenarios and then, we live in this perpetual state of being a victim. So for me, for example, I try to be really fair in my self-exploration, self-observation, because yes, difficult things and hurtful things have happened to me, but I've also contributed to difficult and hurtful things towards others. And this is where self-compassion is so important, because we have to look at ourselves in a compassionate way. Because in my perspective, truly what I believe is that if we know better, we can do better. And that can be triggering for a lot of people, because I've talked to people about this, and some people will say, well, I don't really buy into that, because some people know exactly what they're doing. And to a degree, I agree with that. I think if people's intentions are to hurt, they will hurt. That's perfectly understandable. If you set out to hurt someone, you will hurt someone. But I think the important thing to say here is, if you understand the impact of what your hurt might mean for someone in their life, and maybe you have felt that as well in your life, you might choose differently. And that's what I always talk about. I say, if you know better, you can do better. Because the more we know, the less we hurt. The more we work on ourselves, the more we release some of these things within ourselves, the more likely we are to be more mindful towards others, but also the less likely we are to intentionally hurt other people. Because if you've experienced suffering like I have in my life, you know that that's not something you ever want anyone to go through. I never want someone to go through any suffering that I've ever experienced. If there's anything I can do in my lifetime, anything I can contribute in this lifetime will be to eliminate human suffering. So there it is, guys. I am now down to a few seconds to go. So I'm going to wrap up my episode here. As always, I like to say, I hope something I said here was insightful for you guys or helpful to you guys in some way. And please remember, the light exists within yourself, and always remember to spread your light, share your light everywhere you go. Okay? And I'm sorry I had to cut the episode so abruptly, but that's the time I have and I've got to go. All right, guys, I will see you guys on my next episode, and I hope you guys have a fantastic holiday weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye.